Okay, welcome to lesson number 2. So this week we're going to focus not on plotting reflections, but how we show form on a reflective surface. I'm actually going to give you, what do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12 pages of my next book, which is a book all about rendering. And I've put together those pages for you early, and I will upload them and make them available to you because I think they do a nice job of explaining things that I might miss this week. There's a lot to it. It's one big simple idea, which is called the Fresnel effect, and it's all about how the strength of the reflection varies as our angle of incidence varies across that surface. So let's get into these setups here, and I'm going to explain it in a bit more detail and more eloquently than what I just did. So then we're going to get into some Photoshop setups and things as we start to render. So this is more the rendering week. We're starting to render this week. And so first off, let's talk about this little chart. So what you need to understand, and our whole goal this week is going to be to start to look at photography and photographic examples and look and try to understand what we're seeing and why. And once we learn that, then we can start to turn that into a rendering strategy. So one of the things we need to look at here is that if let me get a little something to write with. How about this one? I'm also going to give you some tool presets this week, just some basic things to help you make your renderings a little bit better. Okay, so if we look at this, if this side of the chart over here is 100% matte surface with no reflections on our sphere, and this side is 100% mirrored, effectively chrome, okay, those are two ways to render. Both are actually fairly simple. The chrome is actually probably the simplest, but it's a little bit labor intensive because basically you're rendering a warped picture of the environment that surrounds your object. On the matte surface side, it's also pretty straightforward, probably a little faster than chrome, not as labor intensive, but also just as mentally challenging. In the middle, we have shiny surfaces of varying values. So if I have a white sphere here, that is over here, and I'm using a 0 to 10 value scale, and 0 being white, 10 being black, and 5 in the middle, obviously 0 to 10, and red is somewhere around 5, and 10 is obviously black. And this is your rendering strategy, okay, is how much of that surface is being communicated, or the form of the object, how much of it's being communicated by the matte surface information, meaning the core shadow, right, and the light side and the shadow side, and reflected light, versus the reflection of the environment. So in the case of a white sphere over here at this end, you would render it, most of it is matte surface rendering with a little bit of reflectivity, just a hint. Over here at the other end, the black, right, it's almost all, if we look at this as an amount, it's almost all reflectivity, and really, if you look at the sample here, and we'll look at more of these examples, really 0 matte surface. So again, look here, we look at a white sphere, strong core shadow, nice light side, right? The red, number 5 value, I can still see a decent core shadow. Again, still a nice light side. But then look at the black. The black, the core shadow's gone, right? It's missing. I don't see it. And also no light side versus dark side. Just it's the same. Same down here, right? We see a nice gradation. This is a soft overhead light box in this case. This upper one was you can tell from the highlight that it was a desk lamp. And here's another gradation, and then we get to the black, nothing. So the thing that's important to understand about this is that you need to use different rendering strategies based on the value. If I'm going to render something light value that's shiny, it's most important to get the matte surface rendering correct. If I'm going to render something that's black, it's most important that I get the reflection rendering correct, because I really don't see any matte surface shapes or forms. I don't see the core shadow. None of the information is there to help me see the object. So I have to use something else instead. You can also look over here, and you can see that in the dark area, turn on another layer there, in the dark area it actually appears to be more reflective, right, there than it does here. Well, in this case, my environment is this. My environment is a ball. In this case, those are billiard balls. And what you're going to see is that what's reflecting into the ball, just grab a line tool here, set it to pixels, that's probably okay. So our line of sight, right, we're looking straight dead center of this, and then right here my line of sight bounces out to that corner, and off of this part of the sphere it bounces up to this corner, and this is just like a bent piece of paper. And then right here is another corner, bounces out to there, and here right about there is the other one, and it bounces up to the back corner. So what's interesting about this, one, this is what we should have learned from last week, starting to be able to predict these things. And then you see this extra curve. See, the straight line bends, it bends. That's, this line is here, and then this straight line is bending there, and then this one's got a extra large bend to it, and that's because it's this L shape with a curve in it. So that curve, right, is right there. Can't see it because it's black, so that's the curve. So that is the environment surrounding these 6 balls. So if I look here, there's a corner that's bouncing back out to the corner. I can't see it, it's out of frame, but I can see it in the reflection. And the other corner is there, and the other corner is there. There's the extra curve, and then otherwise, if it was a straight line between the two out of frame, it would look just like that, but it has this extra kick. That's where that's coming from. Okay, so how do we render to show the form on the black sphere? Well, there's something called the Fresnel effect, and the Fresnel effect is what we use, and it's going to be, I'm going to kill this page now. Again, I'll give these to you in the folder for this week. You can read through them and refresh the lecture I'm giving, plus you have all the written notes. So the Fresnel effect is based on how your line of sight intersects that surface. So again, it comes back to angle of incidence, which is what the last week was all about. This week, though, the challenging part of it, let me just jump ahead here and see what my next. Okay. So I'm going to give you the definition, which is going to be the basis of how we show all form when rendering reflective surfaces, probably with the exception of chrome. Chrome is a little bit of a special case. So the Fresnel effect is basically this. Here it is put into bold type for you. Where your line of sight is perpendicular to a surface, okay, which would be the dead center of this sphere, or looking over here at this one, okay, the reflection is less shiny. Where your line of sight passes tangent to a surface, the reflection is the strongest. So if that's true, what's going to happen when we look at this black sphere is that we know that the ground around this was just that white piece of bent paper, and it was constant in value and color. And if I look at the chrome, I can see that that's pretty much true all the way across. It looks very, very flat. And if I look at the black sphere, you'll see that there's a gradation. And that gradation, right, is caused from the Fresnel effect. That means that right through here, at the center of the sphere, the reflection is actually more transparent, or has less strength. Remember, this is like the base paint is with the black, and then the clear coat is what's on top of this if it was painted. If it wasn't painted and just polished, like this billiard ball, the physics effect is the same. You have the local color, in this case black, and over here, in this case white, on the base layer underneath. And this is going to provide us with a two-layer rendering strategy inside Photoshop. And then on top of that, you have all the reflections, which are just like a chrome sphere. And they're living really on two layers. You could say that the reflections are all on a clear coat, and the paint is on the base layer. So what happens in the clear coat is that with the Fresnel effect and with that basic law, what happens is a gradation is introduced to this surface. I actually drew on there. Let me just undo that. Because it's less shiny in the middle, more shiny, right, more reflective at where it's tangent, where your line of sight is tangent. It has nothing to do with the direction of the light. It doesn't matter that the light is coming down this way, going down like that. That does not make a difference, and that's not what causes the strength change. So what happens here, the net result is a gradation. You can see that it's actually darker here and lighter out here and lighter out there. And so the net result of that gradation change is our brain interprets that as a form change, right? Because our brains like to see form because of value changes. Look at the chrome one. It looks very, very flat, right? If it wasn't for this curve and maybe the curves created by the environment, it would look like a flat disk. It's really the shadow here on the ground that helps us see that as a volume. So what about on chrome? Well, the values on chrome compared to the background that it reflects, right? We know from last week on plotting reflections, this is probably this part of the reflections bouncing somewhere out to here. And if I put that value here down onto the background, you'll see that it's about one value step darker, even maybe a little bit more here because we're catching a little reflection of the shadow on the ground. But that's generally about right. If I look at this and I pick sort of right out tangent where it's going to reflect its environment, you know, it's probably about a value step darker. Looking at this being 0, right, and this being 10, I do that again, here to here, probably about a step, maybe even a step and a half. Okay, so that gives us a pretty good strategy actually for rendering chrome. What you need to do is just paint the environment that's around your object on the surface of your object and then darken it using a level adjustment about one value step. Now here again, it's really an example to see the ground reflecting in. I don't really want to spend a lot of time talking about that yet. We'll get to that, which is reflections of reflective shapes. Most importantly here is to see how the chrome sphere becomes the background and how it's really just a little bit darker than what it's reflecting. Let's kill that page. Okay, I'm going to move into this one's probably the most fun. So we have this Fresnel effect, and what happens, if I'm not lying to you, trust me I'm not, is I should be able to put the chrome sphere on top of a flat disk, and then by changing the strength of the reflection, I should be able to get something that looks pretty close to reality. So let's give this a try. So if I go up here and let's just give myself a little bit of help. Okay, and I'm just going to basically redo this rendering. Let's go there. All right. I actually had a flat disk there. Let's see where I want to do this. Let me start that over. Let's try it here. I'm going to re-render this. Okay. Let's draw out a sphere. And I'm going to fill that So if I was going to render black, a black glossy surface, that would be how long it takes to render glossy, a matte black. Okay, it's just a flat disk. Remember, there was no core shadow before that we observed. So now what I want to do is I want to grab the chrome here and I want to put it on top. So I'm just going to go to the background layer, Command J, we'll make that a new layer via copy, and I'm going to put it on top of my disk. You can get rid of those now. Okay, so if I take this chrome and I put it over a flat disk, okay, what I want to do now is I want to erase it, and I'm going to use a layer mask to do that. I add the layer mask, and all I need to do is erase the chrome based on the angle of incidence changing across that surface. And we should get something pretty close to reality. Let's give it a try. So what I do is grab a big fat airbrush and make this black. And this one I'm going to turn back on my tool presets. I've got a nice 50% strength airbrush over here. So what you want to do, and this is the basic strategy we're going to employ for the first few renderings we're going to do, is start painting on a layer mask wherever your line of sight is more perpendicular to the surface of your object. So when I start doing this, okay, and I'm going to just paint out the light. I'll put that on a separate layer in a minute. Okay, and let's go a little further. Now the nice thing about a layer mask, okay, is that if you go too far, all you have to do is flip it over to white and you can paint it right back in. So that's going to be pretty helpful later on. So maybe I want the tangency of this to just be a little bit brighter. Basically a little bit more chrome. Right, and if I go too far, that's okay. Just grab the black again, airbrush back over it, okay, and voila. Maybe a little bit brighter, just so we can see that edge of the paper. Okay, so hopefully you get the idea here is that you can vary the strength and hopefully get something pretty close. So let's take this, let's add back the light. I like to do the reflection of the light usually on a separate layer because the light is usually so strong compared, I'll just pick that quickly, that color, compared to the rest of the surroundings that it's reflecting, that it's nice to have it on a separate layer. Now technically I should probably adjust that a little bit. It looks like it's got a little bit of an elliptical shape there, like an ellipse, like a circle reflecting off of that surface. So if I was going to be a little bit more accurate about this, I'd probably go here, go to brush tip shape, turn it so the minor axis is pointing up at our light source, and then turn it into a little bit of an ellipse like that. So that's probably a little bit more accurate. And what about the size? Well, now I just went and made it too big, but it's okay. It's on a separate layer. Grab my move tool, show the transformation tools. There we go. And I can position it. And in this case, when you're rendering your own, it would just be your best guess as to where your line of sight bounces back up to the light. If I know where the shadow is, or if you've put the shadow in a certain spot, it's pretty helpful way to figure that out. So if I look at this, okay, right there's where it's passing the edge of the sphere and creating the shadow, and then here's another one. Okay, those two are going to go back up and eventually meet at my spotlight. I know the light is a little bit in front of our object because the shadow is going behind the object. So that means that the highlight, if it was dead center, right, and like a 45-degree angle, it would be like right about there. But it's off a little bit to the left, so the question is how far does that highlight shift over? Well, Here's a way you can tell. Look at these two lines, okay, leaving the shape. If you draw a line dead center like this, 90 degrees to the silhouette, okay, your highlight's going to be on that line somewhere. So remember, this is all about angle of incidence. So 90 degrees to this, since it's a constant curve, as the surface rolls towards us, okay, that's going to move my highlight, my reflection of the light, further inward. But it's going to be on this line, because that line, right, my line of sight is bouncing up towards the light, which it's parallel, or in this case it'll be, if it was the sun they would be parallel. In this case they're actually radiating from our spotlight. But dead center, there it is, it's in the center of those two, and that will take us back to the light, and that's how I would locate the position of my light, of my reflection of the light, I should say. So there it is. It doesn't look that real. I'm also going to give you my little scratchy brush that I made. So I'm going to introduce again. I would line up, that minor axis would line up with this, so I could actually hold that over there if I wanted. And look at that line and line up my minor axis to it, like this. Pretty close. And introduce a little ellipse and then touch. Let's hide that. Let's maybe zoom in here a bit so we can actually see this happening. And I could start to add some scratches. So there, I've added a couple little, or make it really scratchy. Okay, now back to the task at hand, which was if I, and the question, if I put chrome over the top of a flat disk and then I erase it based on the change of my angle of incidence per the Fresnel effect, will I get something that looks realistic? And I'm going to put these together in a group like so, so that we can turn it on and off. So that's the reality. That's the photograph of the sphere. And here's my fake one. Not bad for completely faking it. Yes, I started with a nice chrome layer reflection map, but look at, that's not so hard to render that. What do you have? You have a shape, you have black, you have this same color and value that's one step darker, and you have a highlight of this reflection of the light and a cast shadow reflecting into here. We should talk about locating that. I know we've talked about locating last week, but just a little quick refresher. If I, again, just like the light, if I look 90 degrees from center and I just draw, whoops, wrong brush. Let's just take a line actually. If I go to dead center and then I draw out to where the shadow is, look at where the reflection is. The reflection actually is on that line. Okay? Same here, if I drew from dead center out to the edge of the shadow, look at where the reflection edge is. Okay, they're on the same line. So that's a nice way, right, is just draw lines from that are perpendicular, okay, to the silhouette. And in this case, because it's a perfect sphere, that means from center. When you get a more complex shape, right, you can still draw them 90 degrees to the silhouette, even though the interior is not, you know, a constant curve. It will still give you a guide as to where, you know, your line of sight's bouncing off of your shape into the environment. So a little bit of review from last week. Okay, so let's kill that. All right, so not bad. That seems to work. I'm going to pull up another couple of examples here. Let's look at another photographic example before I show you another couple of Moto renderings. Okay, I'm going to open up these guys. Okay, now the reason I chose these photos, probably can go to stack them all up here. I'll just close them as I go. We can start at the front of the car and then walk to the back. All right, what's going to happen here is that I want to observe the Fresnel effect happening on this car. And I'll just do a little schematic over the top here. So wherever my line of sight is more perpendicular, I should see more of the local color of the car. So in this case, let's just grab red. In this case, that would be like right through here. Probably a little bit on the front there. And then right along, so along this front fender is a nice spot to look. And then what happens is, as my line of sight becomes more tangent to the surface, so if I was to draw this car in top view, like this is the front here, the front corner, and that's the back. A little bit bigger curve, but we're basically standing somewhere about here, looking this direction. And when I look that direction, that is perpendicular, okay, to that curve. Then as I look down the surface of the car, my line of sight is doing something like this, bouncing off of that surface. Remember, equal in, equal in, equal out, equal in, equal out. But look how small this angle is versus 90 degrees here versus maybe 15 there, and all the way here it's going to eventually just be tangent to 0. So Fresnel effect says that, right, line of sight is perpendicular, less shiny. More tangent, more like chrome. Okay, so net effect down the side of this car, I should see more local color here because the reflection's more transparent, and it should become chrome by the time it gets to the end of the car where my line of sight is tangent. It's happening. Okay, now let's observe this. As we walk around this car, so I took a series of photographs starting at the front, and I'm walking around to the back. You'll see the ground is a constant value in color, but we should observe and see the strength of the reflection change. And again, this is at the core of what we're going to use for this entire course about how to show form with reflectivity. The strength of the reflection has nothing to do with where the light's coming from, okay, which is exactly the opposite, or I shouldn't say the opposite, but it's very, very different than rendering matte surfaces. Matte surfaces are all about the direction of the light and how it intersects that surface. This, you have to forget all of that and learn something all new. So let's see what happens. So I'm going to walk a little bit further down. Here's another nice example. See, more green to the front, more chrome to the back. Okay, I'm halfway down. Now the entire side of the car, right, is getting darker, less shiny. Now it's hardly shiny at all compared to what it was. And now I'm starting to turn around to the back, and now the reflection strength is going to flip-flop. The back is going to be darker, and the front is going to be shinier. And because it's based on our, whoops, don't go away, come back. There we go. The back getting darker, front getting shinier, and the last shot, voila, chrome at the front. Look, this is basically one value step darker. Right, if I look at that, it's a green car, okay? But look at the color. Look, it's one step darker. That's just like what we saw happening on chrome. That means that the reflection, or the clear coat of this car, is so shiny, it's basically becoming chrome, right, at the end, right where our line of sight is very, very tangent. At the back, less so. It's a really nice spot right there where we can see our line of sight is more perpendicular to this corner than it is to this end and to this side over here. So both sides are getting brighter, right? More reflective, more reflective. And then same thing would be happening across to the top, as would be rolling underneath. So wherever that surface rolls away from your line of sight, it becomes shinier. All right, let's kill these guys. Again, I'll put those on the in the folder for you this week. All right, go back to this. Now, this basic rule applies to everything reflective, not only shiny paint, but glass, water, things like that. So if I look at this example, and this is the cross section of a wave, if I look in here, there's my ripples, and this is a Modo rendering, okay, and that's the cross section of this panel here that's flat on the ground. So here it is horizontal with slight ripples, and that's the reflection of it here, like waves on water. Here's my camera, okay, and I blew up one of these waves. So what's happening here is that our sight lines are coming down from the camera, okay, and on the front of the ripple, it's more perpendicular, right? My line of sight right here, this angle, just get a new layer to mess up. This angle, okay, is more perpendicular than this angle, right? Neither of them are totally perpendicular, but it doesn't really matter. The reflective surfaces are very sensitive to angle change, meaning the incident angle change. So, meaning less perpendicular to the wave, more shiny. Here, more perpendicular, right? Not completely, but more than the backside, right? Making it less shiny. Net effect, we see through the reflection of this constant color and value, which is the background, okay? I see on the front of each wave, I can see through to the local color and value of the water. In this case, it's this muddy brownish color. The same thing applies in a hallway. So say I had these floor tiles, and then in this case, what's happening is that the curve, there is no curve to change. What's really happening is that I'm standing, right, or we're standing here, and we're looking into that surface, and then our line of sight's bouncing out. Okay, so if I look to the end of the hallway, I see that angle, and then my line of sight bounces out. Okay, equal in, equal out on both of these. All right, equal in, equal out again. So net effect, this is more perpendicular, okay, right here, the base of my feet. This is less. So the net effect, less shiny. I see more local color, texture, etc. Down there, shinier. See the same thing, the reflection of this glowing cylinder. Look at the strength of the reflection here. We barely see it. And over there, much, much brighter, much stronger. This is a constant color and value in the background. But look at the change in value at A, which is this little swatch here, and B, which is that little swatch taken at the back. Look at the change. Pretty big. That is going to be our bit of magic when it comes time to start rendering form. All right, I threw a couple more examples in here for you. There's a car, another nice example of the Fresnel effect rolling away, right? Less shiny, more shiny, constant ground plane. Look at the comparison of the swatches. Same thing here. Look at the red car, right? Look at it becoming chrome. Look at it become the ground. Same with the black car, right? Less shiny at the front corner. This red is just killing me. There we go. Less shiny, more shiny. Constant ground color and value. But the reflection, totally different, right? Back here versus here. Now, if you look closely, you'll start to see the next thing that I'm going to talk about, which is the way that we use it to show form. This side of the car, I know, is completely in shadow because the shadow is extending beyond the wheel, right, and does not shine onto that wheel at all. So this entire side of the car is in shadow. Yet, I see a very strong form change. And the reason I see this form change right here, across that little fender lip, okay, it's just this surface in top view. Let's think about this for a minute. This surface in top view, if I come over here and draw a little schematic, and this is why I had you spend so much time last week thinking about these reflections. That's the surface that's perpendicular to our line of sight. Then there's this little lip, and then the wheel well cut goes inward. So when we're looking here, okay, and then we're looking something like that into the surface, then we look into this one, okay, the angle, much, much less than it is here. That means this little lip has to be shinier than this big surface. So there you go. They're both reflecting the same ground right here. Okay, both pointing down to the ground, both reflecting this part. Less shiny, more shiny. Net result is a value shift. The cool thing about a value shift is our brains interpret that as a form change. So it's the way that we're going to show form with the strength of the reflection. So kill that page. All right. Now I want to actually, well, while we're talking about the water thing and the waves, let's show a couple more examples here. Thought this was a particularly nice one I shot in Florence, Italy, where we see the local color of the water, okay, which is here, this kind of muddy green, and then we see the cast shadow from these buildings on the left, right? I can tell the light's coming down from the upper left, and it's casting a shadow in all the silt and dirt that's flowing through this river. So we actually see the cast shadow on the surface of the water until I get back to right about there. I've lost it. Now, why is that? Well, again, it's the Fresnel effect, of course, as I'm hopefully beating it into you guys this week. And what we're reflecting across the surface of the water is this big gradation across the sky. So that part reflects right down into here. This part reflects somewhere up into there. And it's less shiny here, more reflective there. So net effect, it's like a chrome layer or a clear coat put over the top of the river, and it's covering over the shadow. So we're going to lose the reflection of the shadow. We get nice reflections of the bridges, nice reflection of the buildings and the walls, right? But if we could see the rest of the river out here in the front, it would look just like what's happening in the foreground here. More river color in the foreground. I took this with a fisheye lens. Here we can see almost straight down into the water, right? We see the local color. We can actually see through. It's transparent. We see down into the depths, seaweed and stuff. And then as the surface moves away and our line of sight becomes more tangent, it gets shinier. Same thing with glass. I need to find I'll find some better glass examples. I'm not crazy about this one yet, but my line of sight's more perpendicular here, which allows me to see through to the interior. Okay, and it's actually less so at the top. It actually becomes a little brighter, like this part of the sky. And then you can see as it rolls away, what we'd expect to happen is this entire part to get shinier, and it does. We start to see more the same color and value as the sky behind it. And as a result, we can't see through it as much. And again, it's not dependent on the direction of the light, because the light is shining over here on this side of the building. And you can see that there's a nice one. This is actually the shadow from the tree in here, but look at how we can't see through those windows, right? Yet we can, when the window comes around, we can see it right here. We can see right through to the interior, but not so over there, just like the water. More examples here. Rolls away, gets shinier. And okay, now that brings us to the fun part. Time to finally render something. Okay, I'm also going to give you this photograph series of indoor spheres, and I stacked them all up. So I've got white, yellow, red, black, chrome, little faceted disco ball, and then that's all with a spotlight illuminating that scene, and then this is all with a overhead reflective box, so we get a much softer shadow straight up overhead. And then we've got the same billiard balls, white, yellow, red, black, chrome, faceted. All right, we're going to talk about the spotlight one, and what I want to do is talk about how we're going to use that Fresnel effect finally. Now that I've shown you all these examples, and hopefully you're not too bored, you could have always fast forward, but it is important. It's the basis of how we're going to show reflectivity, right? Not reflectivity, sorry, form. When I can't use the light, I can use no matte surface information. I have a black black sphere. I want to do a little domed shape over here, a little bump out off that surface. So how would I render that? I already partially gave it away because I already showed the, whoops. Let me transform selection. Just want to rotate that a little bit so that it's going to be a little circle on that surface. And maybe get that ellipse working a little bit better. Yeah, do something like that. Okay. So if I had a surface that I've designed and it has a little domed or bumped shape there, cancel that. Let's just fill in this shape first so I have a shape to work with. I'm just going to paint bucket that. I'm just going to make it completely black. Actually, I'm going to take that back. I have a better way. I'm going to go back to my sphere. I'm just going to sample that. So Command J. I just selected that. Okay, there you can see it. Put it on that surface. You can't see it because it's exactly the same as the black sphere. Okay, what I'm going to do is put that onto Preserve Transparency, which is clicking this little box. That allows me to only paint where I already have pixels on layer 13. Okay, and I'm going to go and grab an airbrush, like so. And now if it's domed, and I think about it, I should say, well, the front edge of the dome is facing more perpendicular to my line of sight. That means that it should be more like this section right over here. So if I do this, you're going to start to see the front of that. It gets a little bit darker compared to this section right in here. So the front of this should be darker than that. So just change the value a little bit. What about the back edge? Well, just like the wave that we saw, the back edge might be a little bit more like this section over here. So I'm going to do that. So I'm just blending between those two, and now we have a surface that bumps out of that, and it doesn't use any of the matte surface information. It only uses the strength of the reflection. And what if I wanted to make it bump inward? Well, all you would have to do is reverse it. Because if it was bumping inward, right, this edge would be shinier. Inside it's a dimple now. So this part would be shinier, that part would be less shiny. Okay, and I'm actually able to show form. Pretty extreme example there. It's a little bit strong probably. Let's do one more nice thing you can do. Once you've got your shape, you can go to Filter, Blur, put a little Gaussian blur on this thing, and we can, oops, I got the one showing underneath it. There we go. You can actually start to create a little radius around that shape just by blurring it. So if I want to change the radius, it's like 2.5D. It's kind of like I'm 3D modeling here. Right, we got a hard edge, and then I'm going to make it softer and just sort of putting a radius on it. So that's a dimple. And let's do that to this guy. And that's a little dome shape. I think that's pretty cool. Hopefully you guys think that's cool, because that is the ticket when it comes to, oops, I've got a little shadow in the way. I can't just flip it over there. That is the ticket when it comes to showing form on a reflective surface. So that is going to lead us into our wrap up for this week, and time to render something from scratch, of which then I'll ask you to do for your homework. So let's kill this page. Actually, that illustration. That's again all in the notes here, and there's the two examples. I guess I did it on the soft shadow one, so I could just flip it horizontal to the other side. Don't save that. Okay, let me look one thing. Yes, this is our last page. Couple more things to look at. the thing I want you to observe on this page that's important, shiny objects become their background. This is a fundamental thing that we, as if you're an industrial designer or concept designer, and even illustrators, you love to show the silhouette of something, and it's great because silhouettes are very important. But when it comes time to make something shiny, if you work too hard to make the silhouette read on a shiny object, it's not going to look like it's ever really in its environment. So let's look at a couple of these photographs. You need to have elements or parts of the shape, right? This edge is being held by this shadow, the silhouette's being held, but if we looked really closely, we'd actually see the shadow is reflecting as well, and it's actually cutting off right here. Let me grab something else to it. That little thin reflection there is the reflection of this shadow getting squeezed into that little radius, and here it is wrapping up here. That's also the shadow. So all through there, it's actually cutting off the real edge that we see, the perceived edge I should say that we see, is actually in a little bit from the true silhouette, which is a little further out. Okay, you can sort of see it over here, right there. That's the shadow, right? That's the brighter ground. So this part though, look, it just becomes the background. So you have to let part of it slide away. Another nice example, here's a nice shot. You can see there's the shadow. That's the true silhouette over here, but the perceived silhouette is actually inboard a little bit because of this dark shadow reflecting. So this is nice. It's a really nice example to see. We have a little swatch of yellow, yellow-orange around this black helmet, carbon fiber texture underneath. The weave is reflecting the light. We'll get further into that later in this course. But what I want you to really look at is that there's the edge of our little swatch of colored paper, and then it becomes, okay, its background as it rolls away, covering the carbon fiber. We can barely see it there. And what about this one? Well, you can probably see what I'm going to show on this one, or hopefully you can just barely see it. There's a nice chrome bumper on the front of this vehicle. There's a bumper right there. But you can see, effectively, it just looks like green grass, right? We see these little guys here. If it wasn't for the two supports coming down there, right, and probably the little wrap around there and here, I guess the 4 spots that are dark holding it, and this little highlight for the bolts, you'd have a really tough time seeing that bumper. Now, you don't want to fight that when we start rendering reflective surfaces. You want to let that stuff happen, because if you do, and you don't like the result, meaning that you don't like the fact that this bumper always disappears into whatever is behind it, right? Whatever's on the ground, then you're going to learn that you shouldn't make that bumper chrome when you make that object. So, it's important to render these things as is to make your material selections, right, before you actually build your object. And I say that really from the mindset of an industrial designer, where everything that we draw and design and render gets built, in theory. So look at this one again, chrome here becoming the ground, right? More chrome there, ground again. So hopefully that illustrates that concept. Okay, this is a little bit I won't say jumping ahead, but we're about ready to jump in and do a Photoshop rendering, a quick one. So I want you to look at this. This is the layer strategy that we're going to use. This one is an outdoor example, but it just talks about here, it gives you the notes in detail about the base layer is where your local color is. In this case, this metallic red. And then we have a chrome layer over the top. And then if you erase the two, right, erase the chrome, revealing the red paint underneath, right, based on the physics that we've learned so far about the Fresnel effect, you actually get a very photoreal looking image. This still has the sketch lines and everything, but you can see how the combinations give you quite a nice temperature change, right, blending the blue and the red. but which would be difficult to paint that all in one layer. So this is really just about layer strategy in Photoshop. So I'm going to kill that page, which brings us to this week's demo.